So initially, I was thinking of doing a presentation about JavaScript in incremental innovation or small steps innovation. And then I realized that actually it was a very specific topic to actually talk about, and probably there were a few things that you probably need to learn about incremental innovation. I'm going to talk a lot also about experimentation. First, before I start with the presentation and everything, I would like to know how many of you actually know something about A/B testing. Okay, that's cool. Nice. Everyone tried A/B testing? Uses daily? Cool. Okay. Product development, meaning maintaining and sustaining a product, software as a service, e-commerce. Who works on that? Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. Okay, this is going to be a little bit complex. Probably this is going to be useful for the future. Right now, it seems like, well, let's give it a go. So, my name is Marco. Yeah, I've been working on Internet things for 15 years. As a front-end developer, around 11, I had the pleasure to start working mainly with JavaScript at Guest-Centric. Someone thought it was a very good idea to build a software as a service in 2007, when Internet Explorer 6 was the best browser you had. No, actually, they had already the 7 as beta. So it was the best browser back then. So really nice idea. You debug with alerts, amazing stuff. About me, I love to travel. Most of the photos that you have here actually were taken by me in amazing places. This is Mostar in Bosnia. Really, really awesome day. I basically not only like to travel, but I love history, so I try to visit all the historic places. This is actually one amazing place to visit, a lot of Turkish influences. I was an enthusiastic front-end developer for many years. Currently, I'm a manager, so I don't know how, but I was able to actually put myself here between two developers. So my presentation is not going to be super technical. It's a lot about the philosophy of doing things, but I will try to make sure that you have a couple of lessons that you are able to use on your daily work. So after my research, these are a couple of ways of dealing with innovation. I'm trying to put this in buckets. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to understand when you start mapping out things. And so there's two axes. So you have the technology, meaning new technology, and you have the business model. So incremental usually happens when you have a business model that is well established and you use the current technology. Examples of incremental, you have Amazon, or Booking.com, of course. And then you have also the disruptive, meaning that it's a business model already exists, but you actually try to use bleeding edge or not very well-developed technology to, at one moment, disrupt the current market. I think one of the examples that you can use about this is actually the iPhone. The iPhone started really, really early, where they tried to actually develop some technology that was a little bit far-fetched. It didn't work properly, but with the advent also of the iPod, you start to actually get a completely different way of using the phone. So it matured over time until it actually was disrupted to the market. A radical is basically you just pick up new technology and you apply a completely new business model. I dare to say, and this is my opinion, it's not on Wikipedia, radical is more something like Uber, where you actually have a completely new set of technology and tries to completely revolutionize the market with a very different business model. For convenience, architectural is basically when you have more or less a set of technology that you can actually apply directly to a new market. Then a little bit far-fetched, but bear with me, that would be something like Uber Eats, that they use more or less a technology they already developed into a new market. Now that I try to actually put you in context regarding innovation, I would like to talk about incremental innovation. So first, and that's why I asked a couple of questions before, it's applied to existing product. It needs to be something that already exists, a base of customers, not fully developed, of course, because you want to attract more. And of course, you do the incremental innovation to support the current business model. It's done with incremental steps, means that you start somewhere and you start adding more and more features. And you do this by validating through experimentation in a parameter metric. I will talk about this later on, so no stress. So as the first step, I want to talk about the process. The process, in this case, is going to be experimentation. So experimentation is you pick up an idea and you develop into a step and you validate it against a parameter metric. The greatest thing about this is that it promotes ideation diversity, meaning that everyone can actually have an idea. And there's a very common thing, which is the EPOS, which is a highly paid person opinion. It's not allowed, because you might have an opinion, you might actually have a very huge salary. It doesn't mean that you're right. Data will tell you that if you're right or wrong. And I can tell you for sure that most of the times we are wrong. Okay, probably not really wrong, just not absolutely right. There's 3 states in experimentation. You have complete validation on primary metric, meaning that, yes, the customer validates that your concept, your idea, your hypothesis was valid, but most of the times you are in the realm of unconclusive, meaning that you're not able to draw any conclusion. And of course, you have the end of the spectrum, which means that it's completely invalidated and the idea that you have initially doesn't really work. So all of this experimentation is validated by users. Users will give the input by the way they act on the platform. And in order to do this, you actually need to promote something which is called the data democratization. This doesn't mean that everyone gets the right to vote. It means that everyone has right to actually check the data. Because it's vital for you to have, in your process of ideation, access to all the data that is available. And this fosters a lot of autonomy and ownership, meaning that you're going to be the expert on a certain topic. You'll be the one that's going to generate an idea, and you are in control. And then you're going to validate that idea, and people will tell you if you're right or wrong. So one example, and this is a little bit anecdotal, so bear with me. Example of an A/B test. I think this case showed up in many presentations about A/B testing. So A, meaning this is base. Base means this is what exists in the current platform. B is the alternative. This is the thing that we are trying to actually test. So who thinks A is the best solution? Could you raise your hands, please? 1, 2, nice. So B, how many? A lot of unconclusive, a lot of people that don't know. Fine. So I'm going to ask for forgiveness now. Actually, this was a trap because you don't know what you're voting. You see 2 examples, but you don't know why you're actually doing this. What you really need to get from the start is, what is the context? What are you trying to do? It's not a matter of, this is my taste, and I think this one is going to be more valid, is what actually is the purpose that you're trying to get. So you need to actually create something that is an hypothesis. An hypothesis means that I've seen a certain behavior, in this case that I do believe, let me go a little bit back, that the contrast between the color of the text and the background is actually too dim and probably unnoticeable. So if I see this in user testing or through data, this is what I'm considering. What I will expect is if I increase the contrast between these two, for all the users, I will allow them to see more clearly the call to action and follow with the critical path of, in this case, the cell. And we're going to validate this by more interactions with the button that will hopefully result on more items sold. And of course, the last part of the hypothesis is really important, which is what motivates you. This is almost a commitment that you have not only for business partners and your customers mainly, saying, I'm doing this because I want the best. So this is just part of the scientific method that needs to exist in tech. I believe that most of you probably learned this on, what was it, 7th grade, 6th probably. Probably most of you forgot about this, but this actually is the core of experimentation. It's not different from actually the ones that you test in the lab, meaning that yes, you do need a user problem. Yes, you should actually research, get all the data that is available, generate your hypotheses with almost your oath to the user and business, and then test it. And of course, draw the conclusions. And this part of the conclusion is vital. It's quite relevant because when you're making the decision, you really need to have data to support that the intention that you had right from the start is visible. Meaning that if you actually change or something in the website that ends up in better conversion, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing the right thing for the user. It just means that you're probably gaming it, you're forcing it, you're cornering people, and you cannot actually allow that to happen. What you need to actually make sure is that I want to do this and make this easier, and I can prove it with data. Not only the primary metric, but actually go through the secondary or more, if needed, to validate that this is what you're trying to accomplish, and you have the data to prove it. And of course, share the learnings. So this is basically the cornerstone of A/B testing, which means that data is really relevant. I want to actually put just a little bit of thought. It's really relevant that data is raw, and we are humans, and we are the ones that are interpreting it. If data doesn't lie, but we do lie for it, so we can actually cut, manipulate as much as we can to get the truth or the relative truth from it. So, nevertheless, keep this in mind. But data is really, really relevant. So what does this mean in terms of product? Doing experimentation actually promotes an easy adaptation to the market. You don't actually have to always do market research to know how actually the traffic is shifting. You're getting the signal at the moment. You know that it shifts. Throughout years, you have this mass of users that start to have slightly different behaviors. I will talk about this in the next slide. You also have a faithful representation of the users. It's not personal opinions. If you are actually responsible for a product, you're probably not the core or the best example as user of whatever product that you're selling. It's quite common. You have access to different information. You live in a different country. There's a whole different world for you. And what might actually be, in the morning someone was talking about the hamburger, there's people, they don't know what the hell it is. They really don't. But this is the kind of situation. All these biases will make you choose the wrong kind of experimentation. That's why it's relevant, it's really, really relevant for you to actually thought it through and of course validate the best you can. And you end up with a very firm and validated progress. Everything that you incorporated in your platform was thoroughly tested and approved. You don't have random things that actually might be affecting the product at the end. I was talking about the traffic shifts, and I find this is very dear to me because there's some time ago I went to China, and I was really surprised that everyone was on their phone. And if you think in Portugal or whatever in Europe, people abuse of phones, you don't know. It's massive. And the other thing that it was a harsh reality for me is that most of the people, the first access they had to the internet was through a cell phone. They never actually hold or have a desktop at home. So many of the moments that we are developing things on desktops, they're actually not even relevant because they have a completely different set of problems. Even the way they interact, and I think I don't have like a big source of this, so take this with a grain of salt. There's some platforms like Alibaba that they are more interested on making sure that they have the 30 minutes with the user every day than actually converting on something. They want to be part of their daily life. And this is why it's also relevant for you. You need to check how the traffic is going. You need to understand if the needs are changing. So, it's going, wait, it's going up. I need to go down. 1, 2, 3. Okay. However, the fact that you are doing these micro changes, sometimes you end up in a situation that you're so close to the reality that you're not able to actually understand what is the real purpose. You do these micro changes and you validate them and you stop thinking about the true objective. I brought this one because it's actually quite popular now, but you have this horseless carriage syndrome, where actually the first cars, or some of the cars, they actually have a horse, you know, so it's a little bit similar to what existed before. But the funny thing is that these didn't actually went away. You might actually look at these pictures like, this is very stupid. The reality is we still have mirrorless cameras. We call it mirrorless cameras because actually the mirror is not needed. We still have wireless this and wireless that. Like wireless networking, you don't need a network, you don't need cables. It just means that this is the concept. And sometimes we actually end up not thinking about the concept, but about the technology that we are implementing. And we end up losing a bit of perspective on things. And I keep going up. So it's really important for you to actually keep in mind the long-term value of what you're doing. And the way you need to hold yourself accountable is by making sure that you have an outcome-driven product development. What does this mean? It means that you should focus on something that you want to change as a global thing. Let me give you an example of this. If you have a lot of bouncers, or people actually arriving to one of your landing pages and actually bouncing back, what you want is actually, how can I retain? How can I actually give what people need? And this would be one of the outcomes, meaning I want to actually have a retention or improvement of retention by 50, 70%. And this is our major goal. This is our commitment. And then technically we need to actually create something that solves this. So this gives us a long-term purpose. OKRs are really good on this. I don't know if you're using them. I love them. Be careful. They tend to be a religion also, and sometimes you end up more with the process than anything. But they are very similar to SMART goals. If you use SMART goals, they would be very, very similar. The thing that I like is the fact that it provides radical focus. And actually, it's the name of a book that talks about OKRs. If you haven't read them, read it, please do. It's worth it. And it tells you that you need to be radical when you're prioritizing the tasks. If you commit to do something, you only do that. If you said that, okay, this quarter I want to do this, this, and this, you only do that. If the plan was not to tackle technical debt, it's not the plan. If the plan was to commit to technical debt, there's no product innovation, and so on and so forth. So it means that I want to achieve this. And one of the tricks is actually make sure that you have an aspirational goal, that you need to go the extra mile to make sure that you are able to succeed. And one thing is that in terms of product development, disruption needs to happen. You need to always have a little bit of segment or a little bit of bandwidth to do disruption. What does this mean? Okay, you do all this incremental, but you can be disrupted at any moment. If someone actually comes with a different technology, and they are lucky, they will put you out of business in no time. And you need to put yourselves in very difficult situations and always try to disrupt yourselves, always. So now technology. So I have like 11 minutes. Let's see how it goes. So what does this mean to tech? So experimentation has a really good thing, which is it does keep you focused on the goal, which is the value for the user. You can feel directly the connection between the technology that you're implementing and the impact, and of course, you have the validation of all the tech choices and accepted patterns. It's quite common for you to read a blog and say, well, you know, actually, if you want to treat your customers with respect, you should follow these patterns. Most of them that are not even absorbed. They are just basically a statement of someone that has hopefully good taste, but not validated at all. They might not work because your customers are not ready to absorb it and understand how useful they can be. So you can validate this. However, the fact that you do a lot of experimentation, I'm talking about the minimal viable steps every time, meaning that you cannot actually experiment something in too intense or too complex. If there's too many variables, you won't know where the signal is coming from. If you put too many things and test it at the same time, and I see this very often when people actually show A/B tests with full pages. Come on, there's so many things that can go wrong, from color schemes to fonts to so many things that I struggle sometimes to see how they actually were able to draw conclusions from this. But then again, probably they have a secret sauce on this. But what happens is that if you're doing a lot of small experiments and you have a lot of people working on a product, you're going to have a massive code degradation. Complexity will increase, a lot of inefficiency, probably sometimes doing exactly the same thing twice. And of course, this will reflect on site speed. Consistency might be an issue if you're actually not taking care of it, because you might implement things slightly, and sometimes you develop under the reasoning that it's personalization. That's why it's unique. And also there you have the multi-platform support, which means that you have the audience shift that you sometimes might not be prepared. So some of the solutions that we can have, they are actually quite conventional. One of them is you need to use components. If you use components, most of them have been tested, so you're reducing those variables that I talked about that when you're doing the experimentation, they will vanish, meaning because you tested the component thoroughly. It also allows you to actually focus more on the problem than on product development. So you have a problem for the user, and you try to solve it, not necessarily going after the technical expertise that needs to be implemented or have to be implemented. Another thing that is vital is try to use service as much as you can. I know this is not front end, but if you're able to actually use more towards microservices, things that are more controllable and easier to roll out, they will help a lot, and especially to serve components. Then there's a multi-platform support, which means that, remember about the traffic shift that I was talking about? It's really vital for you to have an environment that you can shift as soon as possible. A critical thing here is not to follow where your customers are. It's to make sure that you know where they're going to be. Because if they move all of a sudden from web to apps, you're already too late. Your advantage is gone. You're basically trying to satisfy someone that already has been having needs, and you're opening up a great opportunity for someone to actually conquer the market first. So arriving first and making sure that you're prepared to deal with this is critical. And of course, consistency will allow you to predict behaviors, and it will make sure that you're able to understand better the platform. And yeah, of course, it will probably allow you to have more time to think about the customer. And always, always bet on the craft. Good practices are vital. However, this is the how, not the what. The what is always what brings value for the customer. The how is how you actually deal with things. It's a sine qua non thing. It needs to exist. It's a health metric. It's something that you always need to actually look at. In terms of tooling, you need to actually have events for pretty much everything. Please log everything. If you have bandwidth and you have a place to store it, store everything. It will be needed at a certain moment. You're gonna actually want to know how many people overread, how many people actually click through, and how many people actually saw this area of the page. If you can, log pretty much everything. And also, you need a lot of monitoring. Because when you're doing experimentation, a couple of things can go wrong. You might introduce bugs that you are not aware, or you might even change drastically the way people actually behave on the website. In this case, you should have monitoring. It also prevents you from making other errors, and there's two things that they need to exist. An SLI. Does anyone know what is a SLI? No? Cool. SLI is a service level indicator. It means that this is one critical metric that we are looking to make sure it doesn't get violated. It converts into SLO, which is a service level objective, which means that we want to keep this number at this, which means that in terms of performance, we want to actually serve the customer under 3 seconds, let's say, or 4 or 5 seconds. And this is basically the SLO that we establish. A service level agreement is, we can say actually, it's the whole agreement that we want to have a service running. And of course, one of the things that is vital, because it's a little bit hard to have testing for all of the new functionalities that you want to test, is make sure that you have a fast deployment to rollback. If you fail, you are able to actually revert really quickly. So in strategic terms, and this is basically if you can absorb this part, it would be vital, is that tech should support product, but always lead with innovation. The boundaries are our responsibility as tech people to push and provide new solutions. Do have technical roadmaps. All that technical debt, all those inefficiencies that you have in terms of process, they should be accounted for and sized. And keep in mind that performance is never a target. It is really a state of mind. It's something that should always be dealt in a strategical, tactical level. If you have a situation that you have developers shaving off 10 milliseconds of a call, you're doing it wrong. You need to actually allow people, it's almost a budget that you're using. You always need to thrive for it and making sure that you have the best performance website or app or whatever. And I just wanted to actually go through a couple of myths here. If you think that incremental innovation only applies to really big e-commerce websites or a lot of traffic, be a little bit more creative than this. You are still able to actually put functionality, even if you're not doing A/B testing, you can still validate key metrics. At least commit to something when you implement a functionality, please check if it's working. And you can only do that by validating the metrics that you defined for your hypothesis. And you should do this, because then you don't know if you're actually adding any value or not. Incremental innovation is slow. I also don't believe this, because you can actually move quite fast. You can actually, if your commitment is to have the smallest step possible, and this I'm not actually encouraging anyone to do micro steps, I'm just saying that make sure that you reduce the variables for testing to the smallest, or in the smallest piece that you can. But you can actually test a lot of things. However, if you don't have the strategy, it's going to be really hard to end the goal. If you don't have those outcomes defined, it's going to be really hard to push through, and you might actually end up in circles. And the part of the incremental innovation is driven by business is also not true. Not everything is about conversion of something. You can do a lot for performance, you can do a lot for making sure that there's more clarity on the information that's presented to the user, error validation, removing friction points, and actually that's the trick. The trick is that you remove as much friction from the user, and you make them more comfortable, or as comfortable as possible, because this is for sure what is going to be helpful for the business in the long run. And I didn't actually wrote a thank you, but thank you. If you have any questions.